covering the first 3 slides, starting with an introduction on slide number 1. I do not plan to read all the bullet points word by word, but if it is okay with you, I plan to go through each of the points with a particular emphasis on what has been updated to make sure we provide you with all the necessary information. Please feel free to stop me if you have any questions throughout the presentation, but if we can move to slide number 1, I will start with the introduction slide. Trenis, can we move to the slide number 1? Perfect, thank you. The reason for considering the COPs is to finance our share of the Serafian building project. The construction proceeds that we're looking to deliver is $27 million now. No change to the construction period, which is expected to be 2 years. COP is one of the traditional financing mechanisms used by many local governments. COPs, unlike GO bonds or the refinancing that the district recently took on, they're not repaid from property taxes, but the general fund. It is also the team's understanding that the district is considering a March 2022 GO bond measure, and that the GO bonds will be allowed to prepay the COPs early. To coincide with this plan, the next sub-bullet point is a very important feature of the COPs, which is proposed to be issued with a short-dated option to prepay. On a later slide, we'll review more details about the redemption provisions. But next, to allow the utmost flexibility and to reserve the district general fund for core education programs as well as other priorities, we will be funding 3 years of capitalized interest at issuance, at least as presented in this presentation tonight. This is also to correlate with the GO timeline. I have a sample timeline slide on the next one, but just to first note that there is a longer than the GO timeline, and the 3 year of CAPI is longer than the scenarios that the board previously reviewed in May, which had periods ranging from 0 to 2 years. 36 months is the legally allowed maximum. And again, a more conservative approach for timing flexibilities, because we understand that plans can change, market conditions can change. Trenis will present more information on market conditions, but just to provide you with an overview, rates on municipal bonds continue to be around historical low levels. Given PCC's excellent credit rating, our preliminary analyses show that the all-in true interest cost for the proposed COPs will be around 3.5%, assuming the COPs are never prepaid or refinanced. And if the district executes the early prepaid as currently contemplated, which is in August 2023, the effective borrowing cost would be as low as 1.5%. We'll dive into these figures later in the presentation, but I would like to note that the 3.5% and 1.5% are estimates that includes all the costs associated with issuing the COPs. Are there any questions before I move on to the sample timeline slide? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the next slide. So we prepare an illustration of the sample timeline with regards to the overall plan and depict the thought process behind the COP structures. Just to orient ourselves throughout this slide before getting into more details, on the top portion in blue relates to the COPs. The bottom portion in orange are dates for the future potential GO bond measure. To start with the COPs, the first date on this slide in the upper right-hand corner, we expect to sell the COPs in February of 2021. And moving along the timeline to its right, the first semi-annual payment will occur in August 2021, which is the interest-only payment that is covered by capitalized interest that we discussed earlier. Moving along further, the next payment will occur in February 2022. Again, another interest-only payment covered by capitalized interest. Do not worry, I will not read you every of these dates, but now that I've covered how the capitalized interest fund will repay the interest-only payments, you will see that how 36-month or 6 semi-annual payment of the COP will be repaid. And to the far upper right-hand corner, looking at the payments starting in August 2024, which is beyond the 3-year CAPI period, if the COPs are not repaid with GO bond dollars, that is when the district will start making payments from the general fund. The dark gray arrow on the top shows the COPs are prepayable on any date starting in August 2023. You're not obligated to prepay them in August 2023, but that is the starting date that you get to exercise the flexibility to repay the COPs without any premium. Which is also the reason that one, you see those payment dates under that arrow covered by those arrow area, and two, the or reference. Whether covered by capitalized interest or the general fund, the district can repay them in full with GO bonds starting August 2023. Next, the COP dates correlate with the GO dates. So let me start with the dates that are referenced in orange. The deadline to call for a March 2022 election will be in December of 2021. Moving to its right, assuming that the GO measure is passed in March 2022, and conceptually following the approval, the district starts the planning process for the first series of the GO sale. If the board approves the sale in March 2023, we'll be able to deliver GO bond funds by July of 2023. If this GO timeline is executed, we'll be able to prepay the COPs on that first allowed date of August 2023. You're not obligated to this timeline, as the light gray arrow on the bottom shows. You can use GO to prepay the COPs any date after the passage. I know I just cover a lot of different dates and descriptions on this slide. Does the committee have any questions for me? No? Hearing none. If we can move to the next slide here, terminology.
Sorry, I have some questions. I was asking if Tammy or Berlinda did, but I was on mute. So if they don't, I just have a few questions. My first question is, does it really take a year from March 2022 before you can sell the first bond in March of 2023? Is that just the administrative time it takes to get through, once it's been approved, to actually get to market?
No. Oh, but go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, thank you, Anne. And I think Anne and I were getting to the same answer, which is no. That's more of a conservative assumption to allow you as much time as you would need, understanding that after the March passage, you will be waiting for the county to certify the results, as well as you, the district board, certifying the results. That process shouldn't take more than a month or a month and a half. Following that, if you were to start the issuance process, if the projects on the side of the district's planning process is all aligned, and if we start per se in April, it's roughly a 90-day process to secure rating, go through the pricings. So that 1-year timeline is more of a more conservative approach in the planning of the GO process.
So let me ask the follow-up question is, and I realize we don't know what the interest rates are going to be at any of these future periods in time. And when we're talking about interest rates on these bonds, I understand it's a block of bonds that all have different maturities and rates. But in general, do COPs or GO bonds have lower interest rates? Is there an advantage to move the process of GO bonds, once approved, forward quicker to get a better interest rate is what I'm kind of getting at.
So I'll go ahead and address that one. So the first question about the pricing of COPs versus GOs. COPs are typically a little more expensive than GOs, probably about 20 basis points overall. And that's the pricing difference. But as far as being able to do things faster to eliminate maybe interest rate risk, right? Because we measure interest rate risk in time. And so if you wanted to say, hey, we want to move quicker, get done with the first issuance by, I don't know, call it August, or start in August of 2022, and then be done in November of 22 to call in February of 2023, you could do that. But that's,
and I realize we're talking about the interest when we sell the COPs in 2021 compared to the interest in GOs in 2023, and a lot can happen in 2 years that can wipe out 20 basis points. So it could go the other way. But I was just curious.
That's the pricing difference. As far as trying to judge a timing difference for 2 years, I mean, remember, you're selling the COPs today at, let's call it 350, which in theory makes GOs roughly 330, right? If you have the same call feature on it. But can we sell GOs at 330 come July of 2023? I would say yes, because you won't need a short. What's driving the cost of your money up is that short call date, right? That you've got a 2-year call. If we can get to the point where you sell GOs and you've got a longer call date on it, then 10 years, which is typical. 7 is typically a minimum for long-term GOs. But if you get to that point, John, at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, once you change the call feature, your rate will get better than that 330.
Yeah, okay. So we obviously you guys will handle that professionally when and if we get there, of course. Mike, you've told us before, but if we miss March 2022, when is the next potential GO election beyond
November
March?
of 22, and then after that it jumps to 24.
There's nothing between March of 22 and 24?
There's November of 22.
Oh, November. I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's could be a local election that you're going to bear the responsibility of paying for.
Okay. And I ask that because if anything goes south for March of 22, what kind of situation are we in for the COPs? What's the B plan for the COPs if we miss on March 22, if it doesn't pass or something happens?
If we have capitalized interest for 3 years, once that 3 years is up, we're on the hook to make the payment. So we'll have the annual payment to make, and we'll have that in the stats towards the end. And any payments we make is not refundable by the bond. So
back to the B plan.
Yeah.
What would be the B plan? A November 2022 election or paying a lot of interest till March of 24?
That's a value judgment we would need to make. I think more than the cost of the election is how's the surveying going, what's the likelihood of success, and all those other things that go into the bond strategy.
Because the paid interest, what in approximate dollars, what if we miss, how much are we talking about a year in interest that we would be paying?
Well, it's interest and principal. It's on the final slide. I believe it's about 1.7 million.
How much?
1.7 million.
A year?
Yes.
Yeah, after the capitalized interest period, that's the number.
So if we miss March of 2022, if we decided to go for November of 2022 and we're successful, would the timeline still allow us before we get to 1.7 million
Yes.
a year?
Yes, if Trustee Martin, if you look the slide here, February 2024 would be the last payment date that will be covered by capitalized interest. So November 2023, and if we can get on the issuance process as soon as thereafter, we should be able to complete that and repay the bonds before the next payment, August 2024.
So I think you asked my next question, and that is even March of 2024, if we miss on 2022 and November of 2022, if we're successful in March of 24, we can still make it without hitting our operating budget for 1.7 million. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay, I think that's important for us to know. I mean, obviously we're all on the A plan, but it's nice to know there's a B plan. Okay, those were my questions. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes.
I'm wondering about the source of repayment of the general obligation bond, because it seems that our budget already is so spoken for. 80% needs to go to salaries, and then out of the other 20, we have everything else. So are we going to be squeezing student services or programs to repay the general obligation bond, or how is it repaid?
Well, it is a general fund obligation. It will take precedent over other things. It's roughly 1% of our budget. So when you're looking at COLAs and things, that means it's going to have the first call on that money. It's important to know we also recently finished paying off our SERP, which was about $800,000 a year. And so we have had debt service in the general fund ongoing for a number of years. The trick is to keep it manageable, but this is at 1%.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I thought the GO bonds
Yeah.
were covered by tax revenue, new
That's
tax
correct.
revenue.
I think Trustee Brown meant COPs.
It's Trustee Silver, and she
Silver,
was
sorry.
speaking to the COP payment.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah, I thought that's the whole reason I'm thinking the strategy of B and C plans is trying to not hit the operating fund with any liability. Or any
Right, but
cash expense.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying though is that we already have an amount in our debt service because we just made our last payment on the last SERP, which means we're used to making a payment. So it's not, this payment we're talking about wouldn't be over and above what we already have accounted for in our figures. Is that correct?
It would have to be budgeted moving forward.
Yes, absolutely.
And we would,
Yeah, I think we
it's a
get it.
very low risk. First of all, we have a couple of dates on which to transfer over to a GO bond, but if that does not occur, the board is obligating the general fund for about 1% moving in the future. Now, it's rare for a certificate of participation to go a full 30 years. The lifespan is usually shorter than that. And the experts can comment on the date, but it's around 10 years, I think. So we can make the call at any time in the future. It's just, it's going to cost the general fund after the 3 years.
Okay, I think we're ready for the next one. We're already on number 3.
Great. So slide number 3 here, you have been hearing these terminologies used throughout tonight's presentation. This is also a slide that was in the May briefing. I will not take as much time on this slide to read through every point, but to highlight each terminology focusing on any updates. So starting with lease asset, and we'll explain more about the mechanics of a lease and why we would need a lease asset. This is fundamental to COPs, and it's essentially what the district leases to the counterparty that Ann will also explain their role here in our COP financing. The district has selected the Visual and Performing Arts Center as the lease asset, it being the essential purpose asset with enough value to substantiate our COP lease payment. Next, credit rating. The district has geo ratings with both Moody's and S&P. We presented to S&P on Tuesday, seeking a rating for the COPs. Based on the fiscal health and overall credit strength of PCC, we do expect to have, again, high rating for our COPs as well. We're expecting it to be rated AA, but we won't know until another week or so. AA would be one notch below your geo rating, and it is typical for COPs to be rated lower than geos, given that geos are secured by property taxes within the entire district's boundaries. With such excellent credit rating, reserve account. Just to update you, it is anticipated that we will not require a reserve account, which is a significant interest cost savings to the district without having to set aside cash as additional security and a part of the COP financing. We already touched on the option to redeem the COPs, but just to state it again, the earliest will be August 2023, which is within 18 months of a March 2022 geo measure passing. And correlated that timeline to Trustee Martin's question. So that's that 18-month time frame for Plan B if need be. Lastly, capitalized interest. Having already reviewed its function, I would like to emphasize that it is the plan to structure the COPs with 3 years instead of 2 years of capitalized interest to allow flexibility if additional time is needed to execute a different plan. That concludes all of my slides. I'm happy to answer any questions before I hand the next portion of the presentation to Ann. All right, hearing none. Ann, please take it from here.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of the financing. We call them certificates of participation, COPs or COPs. I had one client at one point that said, what does the police department have to do with paying for our financing? But it's really, again, they're certificated interests of the investors. So we'll start with the issuance, which are the gray boxes. So the bondholder or the investor will provide certificates or COP proceeds to the trustee of the district at closing. And then the trustee, which is US Bank, I believe, Pasadena College will draw proceeds as is needed to pay for the project. And then what the college does is they pay lease rental payments to a nonprofit corporation. That's the counterparty to the lease. And the corporation never receives any funds. They assign the lease payments to the trustee, who then pays each of the certificate or bondholders or investors. And if you'll go to the next slide, Trennis. If you'll recall, generally when I show up at your meetings in person, I come with a big briefcase with a stack of documents. And for a COP, it would be much larger stack than for a geo bond. So the site lease agreement, this is just, for us who like words more than diagrams. The site lease is the agreement where the district says we are going to provide the visual and performing arts center as the leased asset or the leased property to the nonprofit corporation. The nonprofit corporation will lease it back to the college, and that provides the instrument so that PCC makes those annual lease payments. And then the nonprofit corporation will assign those payments to US Bank as trustee. And then the trust agreement describes how the trustee will make those payments to each of the certificate holders. Now, where Trennis's firm comes into play is they are the investment bank or the underwriter. So they will enter into a certificate purchase agreement with the college where they say, we are going to purchase these certificates and then we're going to sell them on the open market to investors who want to purchase a certificated or fractional interest in this financing. And that's sort of the mechanics of how the financing works. Again, the board would have to covenant to make annual appropriations to make the annual payments. And of course, then those would take place until the college decides to prepay the COPs with GO bonds should they be successful in their GO bond election. And then if the GO bonds pay off the COPs, then it's the district's taxpayers who are on the hook to pay the GO bonds. Any questions on these two slides or on the structure or the legal structure for this financing? Okay, Trennis?
Okay, so thanks, Ann. So when you go to borrow money, right, it becomes a question of what is our rate going to be? And if anybody's been refinancing a home loan the last 12 months, you know that rates have been going down during those 12 months. And so this is a diagram or a graph of the tax exempt benchmark rates against which we would price your COPs. And it's basically a 8.5 year history, if you will. And it's the 10-year benchmark and the 30-year benchmark rates. And so going back to November of 16, so pre-election, right, the 30-year mark was about 2.5%, and the 10-year benchmark was about 170. Come November of 18, Federal Open Market Committee, which is what FOMC stands for, reversed its policy, and rates started coming down again because they were taking the short-term rate down with it. But more relevant to you guys is what happened in February when we sold your GO bonds, GO refunding bonds. Those are what those benchmarks were at that time, about 150 and almost 1%. So rates were good then. Then of course the pandemic hits. I won't even say it all breaks loose. And there was a period of several weeks where I was getting gray hair. So thankfully, ever since then, as I think the federal government learned, and the Treasury and the Fed and everybody learned during the 2008-9 crisis, there are a lot of things they can do to calm the financial markets, and they put everything to work. And so as a consequence, by now, rates are lower than they were even when you priced the money in February of 2020, which we thought would never be beaten. So as far as market conditions go, it's a very good time to be borrowing when it comes to rate and availability of investors for the money. Any questions on this slide before I move on? Okay. So 7 and 8 will be kind of a summary of what Rachel was touching on, basically on slide 2, 1 and 2, kind of the payments. So the gray box is to sort of say, hey, which is to summarize the scenarios that we've been talking about since the beginning. So across the top, talking about prepaying the COPs in August of 2023. So going on line A, the sub bullets, so you get capitalized interest to pay your COPs through 2023, right? So that's 6 months short of what you set aside, right? You set aside money all the way to February of 2024. So that means the general fund, which is why there's a blank on the next line, the general fund would never be hit. And then presumably if you pass one in March of 2022 or after, I mean, hopefully before, but by August of 2023, you'll have sold GOs to alleviate the general fund from having to make any payments, and the GOs, the COPs would be prepaid. So that left column, that's our plan A, Trustee Martin, if you will, for scenarios. Sliding over to the second column of prepaying in 2025, and that's an arbitrary date. Okay, it's just 2 years after the August 23 date. There's no real magic to that date. But 2 years later, you've got CAPI has been exhausted, right? So the top line, so still on A, sub-bullet, the first sub-bullet, capitalized interest pays COPs through February of 2024. So we're right here. Then the general fund would pick up from there. Really August of 2024 payment, February of 2025 payment, and maybe August of 2025 payment. But if you sell your GOs in time, you don't have to make that payment either. But we've just kept that date just to hopefully make it clearer. And then by August of 2025, the COPs would be prepaid. And the last column, of course, which is pay COPs to term, is you do nothing. You sell them, you get money that's 3.5% for 30-year money. Capitalized interest gets exhausted by February 2024, and the general fund takes over from thereafter. So this is not a misprint. All of these outcomes are the same for B through H, irrespective of which scenario happens. You issue roughly $28 million in COPs, 28.7 million. You capitalize interest through February 2024. That number for that period is about 3.3 million. Net debt service to term wouldn't change, of course. As Dr. Bush mentioned, your payment after the capitalized interest period, which is what the general fund would be on the hook for, is every fiscal year is 1.7 million. Your all-in borrowing rate, no matter what you do, because it's the call date that kind of dictates it, is 3.5%. And we've assumed that first call date is August of 2023. This is not set in stone. It becomes a function of your views on the timing Rachel talked about. So these are all the same. So before I move on to the next slide, are there any questions? No? Okay. I'm having a little bit delay just because I know people put themselves on mute. So then slide 8. So again, we replicated just the information from slide 7 at the top. So the 3 scenarios in gray box there. Then you've got line I, right, which is the capitalized interest you've used. So you borrowed 3.3 million, right? But because you're prepaying by August of 2023, you're only paying out 2.8, call it, of the 3.3 you borrowed. That residual you would put towards prepaying the COPs along with whatever money you raised from the GOs. Your net debt service paid by the general fund to that target date, this one being August 2023, would be nil. And your rates, right, because you've prepaid it on a shorter period, would be about 1.5%. And that's the 1.5% Rachel referred to on the first introduction slide. So as you can see, as you go across the columns, again, you'd borrow, if you don't prepay till 2025, you're still borrowing the 3.3, you've exhausted it, right? So there's nothing left to help prepay the COPs when that time comes. The debt service, the general fund would be on the hook for. So this 1.4 represents payments that would take place in August of 2024 of P&I, February of 2025 of just interest, and then hopefully you'd issue the GOs in time, so you would need a third payment. So this is what the general fund would be on the hook for by August of 2025. But your rate goes up about 100 basis points. Why? Because you've sold your bonds at a premium, but you're leaving them out there longer. And so, of course, then the final scenario is you've issued 30-year bonds, or COPs, sorry, you do nothing, no election passes, nothing happens, and you pay it to term. So the rate you've paid to investors is 3.5%. which by historical standards is very good. I'm hoping all that, so all the diagrams now marry with some numbers. I'm a numbers person, of course, but hopefully one or the other now rings true with everybody, and everybody, it's clear for everybody before we move on to the next slide. Yeah, okay. Last slide will be covered by Dr. Bush.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the timeline. So we're presenting to the Budget and Audit Committee tonight. And then on the 20th, if this committee recommends it to move forward, we'll present it to the full board. They'll do the preliminary official statement on January 22nd, and then pre-market the COPs to investors 22nd through the 29th. We'll price and sell with underwriting on February 1st through 2nd. Post-sale actions through the 23rd, and we should be able to get our money at the end of February, the 24th through the 25th. Okay. Any questions regarding that? Okay. And is there one more slide, Trins?
No, sir. That's it. It's just a big disclaimer slide that
Oh,
I'm
the
so
one
sure-
that says you're not responsible?
I don't read it. I don't expect you to read it. So.
Okay. All right.
I want to back up because I had a little personal issue for 30 seconds, right when you were explaining how the visual arts building is given over to a not-for-profit that when we lease it back from them.
Mhm.
Is that virtually what is happening? And who's the not-for-profit, or is it a not-for-profit we create for this purpose?
So
Who are we giving it to?
So the nonprofit is called Public Property Financing Corporation. They're based in Westlake Village, and they basically serve as a counterparty to leases for municipalities all over California. In the past, when the district has issued lease revenue bonds or COPs, the counterparty has been the State Public Works Board and the Los Angeles County Regionalized Services Corporation. And the reason why we are not using them and why this particular schedule might be delayed is because once the COPs are paid, then we work with the title company to release a lien on the property. And it sometimes takes a little longer to get that paperwork completed with the state or with the county versus with this particular nonprofit corporation that tends to turn things around a lot quicker, and whose work as the counterparty is a nominal fee. It's like $2,500 or $3,000, I believe, plus their counsel's fee, which is around $1,500 if I'm not mistaken. But no money passes through their hands because they assign the payments that they're supposed to receive to the trustee in US Bank.
And this is a question I don't want to ask because you're going to give me an answer I'm not going to understand. But we're very careful with quote gift of public funds, and I'm sure this is very legal in the way it happens. But it seems like in some ways, just conceptually, we're giving a pretty big asset away. We're giving a gift of public funds. There's some in all the legal mumbo jumbo. There's documents that secure the fact that we're really not giving it away, right?
So the site lease states that you're nominally leasing it to the nonprofit corporation, and then the nonprofit corporation simultaneously leases it back to the college.
Okay, so we're not really giving it. It's just a lease one way and a lease another.
That's correct.
Got
Now,
it.
and if there is some sort of abatement provision, not the pandemic, but if there were, for example, knock on wood, a fire or earthquake where the district would not be able to make use of the property, then the payments would cease. So that's a risk that the investors take.
Okay.
The district would also need to provide some evidence that it has some type of liability or insurance on the property. That's part of the closing requirements.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I feel better understanding that. Any other questions on this topic? So, Mike, what is the action you would like us to take?
I'd like you to vote to recommend this to the full board. And we'll be making the same presentation for the full board, but if you could introduce it that you had, the committee recommended it.
And I'm sorry to ask this, but when we're recommending this, can you give me a short definition of this?
That the
Approval of what exactly?
Okay, if we could go up to the title page, Trinis. That the Pasadena Area Community College District issue certificates of participation to finance the construction of the new Armin Sarafian building.
Okay, thank you. So I will ask, based on what Mike just presented, would anyone like to make that a motion?
I will move that we present this to the full board for approval.
Thank you,
Second.
Belinda. Thank you, Tammy. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, I think I heard 2 ayes and I'm a third aye, so that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you to the team. I'm not sure if you want to hang around to hear the governor's budget, but you're welcome to stay with us and you're welcome to leave. So we appreciate the team that we have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
They actually did it, I think, a really good job of explaining what I think is a pretty complicated topic. At least it seems complicated to me. So, okay, let's talk about the governor's budget and who would like to make that presentation?
I'll be making the presentation.
Okay. Then go ahead.
All right. The governor's January proposal, it's a mixed news. I was expecting something a lot worse than it ended up. But the state is facing significant challenges related to the coronavirus pandemic. And that is really the meats and potatoes of this budget. And it even ripples down into the education budget. The major thing is address the urgent need for impact of COVID-19 and related economic impact. So there's going to be a Golden State stimulus of $600 to low-income Californians. There's going to be recovery grants for small businesses. A lot of it will be in the form of tax credits. And there is a significant push to reopen in-person learning. And the focus is on younger students, but there is going to be the push for us to reopen our campuses. The revenue forecast, and this is comparing 21-22 to 2021, may revise estimates. The personal income tax is up by 4.5 billion. Corporate tax is up 629 million, but sales and use tax is forecast to be down 2.3 billion. And that's because we're shut down. There's been some upside in revenues for current year budget, and but that's not what these numbers are. Essentially, the economy has done a V shape, or looks like it's doing a V-shaped recovery. Hopefully it's not a W. I mean, we are going through another shutdown now in the impact, so hopefully it doesn't drop again. Proposition 98 provides a minimum guarantee for schools and community colleges. And although the formula determines total funding, the governor and the legislature determines the allocation. The Department of Finance makes estimates of the minimum guarantee. And for the Prop 98 nerds, we're in test one again. And these estimates cover prior, current, and budget years. So they're looking at 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21, 20, 21, and then 21, 22. They're adjusted periodically with settle up required if funding was below the final guarantee. And that's some of the talk we heard from the ledge analyst's office and making suggestions on what to do with that settle up money. And the governor proposes a transfer to $3 billion to cover current year and budget year to the public school system stabilization account. And as you recall, in this last budget, he depleted all of it while the economy turned, and now he needs to make deposits back in.
I'm sorry, Mike.
Yes?
I don't quite understand that last line, which way the money's going. So there's money going out of the state's operating budget back into the public schools stabilization, which
Yes.
otherwise would have been available maybe for some other good purpose in the state.
Well, it's going out of Prop 98, which and going
Well,
into the stabilization account.
Does that
Which
mean,
was Proposition 2 that was passed around 2014.
so
We said a
if it's
portion
in
would be set
the
aside.
stabilization account, does that mean it comes back to education through Prop
Yes.
98?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So this, I couldn't, it's one of those plus minus questions. I couldn't figure out if this is good news or bad news.
Well, it's good news that we hit the calculation that we have to save. So it's fiscal conservatism that we're setting money aside. It was one of Governor Brown's initiatives that he wanted in good years to save money. So like last year, it can be drawn down. So.
Thank you.
So the Prop 98 estimates, here's the 3 years with the revised and the proposed. You can see that Prop 98 is going up for next year. And you can see for community colleges that it's going up. You will notice that Prop 98 is going up more than community colleges. One of the reasons is because there's a differential COLA between K-12 partners and community colleges. The local control funding formula that K-12 uses statutorily requires that a COLA be applied when there are funds. And since there are now funds for the 2021 fiscal year, they will receive a COLA, which we will not receive. So we'll get a 1.5 COLA for next year. They get a 1.5 COLA for next year, but they have the compounding of the other COLAs, so they come up with a 3.8 COLA for next year. So that's one of the issues, just like backfilling property taxes. When K-12 property taxes fall short, the state apportionment backfills, which they do not do for community colleges.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
So it's my understanding that K-12s are funded on student attendance, similar to the way we're funded on student attendance, only there I think is a little more granular.
Correct.
And I haven't heard as of late, but in general, I thought K-12s were in a demographic decline in student populations.
In head
Maybe that's not true, but
I don't know about the entire state, but
okay.
in our region, that is true.
So, I was wondering if their system is in decline, does that mean there could potentially be K-12 money left over? And I would say, what if our system was in increase while their system's in decline, though I have to suspect that we're maybe not in increase anymore. But
We're-
I'm just wondering when they do these budgets and they're based on student targets and their students aren't there. And I realize the colleges, because a college attendance is discretionary, we could, even in a declining demographic, have better attendance just by people coming if they choose to come.
Correct.
Usually in the K-12s, if there's no kids, there's no kids.
Mhm.
Right.
It's not like there's anything you can do. And I'm just wondering in the, I'm just thinking in my mind, the long-term implications for us if our K-12 partners are in declining demographics, other than that we're going to probably face a bigger challenge in the future.
Right.
But anyway, in
Yeah,
the state budget.
It's possible. It's generally about 10.5% of Prop 98 goes to the community college system in rough numbers. This year is going to be a little different. But, the legislature can change that percentage. The issue is if the K-12 population is declining because the per capita of the state is declining, then we will no longer be in test one and there'll be less money in Prop 98. So as the mix changes, that certainly could happen. But then one of the things in community college finance, we look at the demographics of our feeder schools. And we want to know what the high school populations of those districts are doing, because then that will determine where we need to put our emphasis. So it's one of those things, their problem eventually becomes ours.
Yeah. Okay. That's enough on that. I don't want to.
Okay. So here's some rough estimates, and you have to realize we don't know all the secret handshakes on how they're going to give out the money, but a 1.5% COLA, they're budgeting 111 million for it at the system. That'd be roughly 2.2 million to us in a COLA. There's an increase to online technology and mental health, and we're struggling with how these two things are related. Is it mental health through technology, or is it mental health because we've been doing Zoom so much and now we need help? So, but we should receive about 600,000 for that. There is money for growth. The system is expecting to grow 0.5%. And keep in mind, this is regulated, but different for different districts. So there may be a college someplace in the state that's growing. We're not budgeting any growth. Okay. There is a California Apprenticeship Initiative. It was last year. It's in the budget for some more money. I know our colleagues on Strong Workforce and Instructional Services are working on this, and they're addressing some of the things with our academic calendar to help make this happen. But right now we have none. So we budgeted no increases. Then they want to invest in an online education ecosystem and infrastructure. I'm going to be honest, I don't know what that is, but they're investing in it, and we'll be eligible for 212,000. We'll find out eventually what the rules are for these different programs and how they'll benefit our college. They are giving COLA to all the categoricals. So we should be able to get another 122,000 for that. So we'll get about 3.1 million on ongoing adjustments. This is where the governor's emphasis comes through. He wants to give emergency financial assistance grants for students of $250 million, and he's using the one-time settle up funds for Prop 98 to do this. So our students' share would be 5.3 million. We do not know the rules for giving that out, but we will find out. We're going to get about 2.1 million to address food insecurity and housing insecurity for our students. We're going to get $400,000 to support retention and enrollment strategies. We're going to another 400,000 to expand work-based learning. 400,000 for faculty professional development, and 300,000 to work on zero textbook cost pathways. And we'll receive 50,000 to provide materials for our dual enrollment students with our high schools for another $9 million. So I wanted to cover the deferrals because that is confusing. The 2020 Budget Act included a $1.45 billion in deferral of our apportionment. They didn't cut community colleges, but they deferred our apportionment to lower the Prop 98 guarantee. There was talk of the ledge analysts of reducing this amount. The governor elected to keep it in place. So we'll be moving forward with our trans in March. And this is still happening. Our February apportionment has been deferred. We will not receive apportionment in February. However, in the budget year, the governor's proposing to pay down that deferral by 1.1 billion, leaving a deferral of 326 million. This will return it to the 1920 level of deferrals, and the district will not need to borrow on a trans to cover that deferral. Of course, we don't know the calendar of that deferral. Are they going to be deferring part of May and June and paying us back in July? That's not a significant enough cash issue for us. It's about a $6 million cash issue for a 30 to 45 days. We could handle that. So that's deferrals. Any questions on deferrals? Okay. The next pot of money that we know of is in December, Congress approved an additional $900 billion in economic relief package known as the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. We feel for higher education, it will mirror the CARES Act. Higher education relief fund is going to get $22.7 billion. California community colleges share would be $1.2 billion, and PCC's share would be roughly $300 million. That's almost
30 million.
Yes, 30 million, excuse me. That's almost
300 million would be awesome.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going cross-eyed here. The 30 million is roughly double of what we got in CARES. There is a although they have not released the rules in the legislation, there is a requirement for us to offer the same amount of direct student aid as we did with CARES. So that'd be 7.6 million. But what the rest of the money can be spent on, we don't have the rules yet. With its, mixed blessing with Betsy DeVos's departure, we won't have the constant changing in rules that we were experiencing under CARES. But right now, there's no one at the Department of Ed writing the rules up and releasing them so we can apply for the money. But we anticipate with the new administration, we will get those rules pretty quick, and how to apply for it with the federal government. Is there any questions regarding the budget? It's not real exciting, but financially it's sound in that we're not going to have our deferrals magnitude that we're experiencing current year, and we will receive a cost of living adjustment. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, any questions from the members? I think that was pretty informative. Okay, meeting schedule. Do we get to go all the way to July? Is that possible?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Trustee Martin,
Yes.
I would like to make an announcement. We had chatted about, normally we would bring the 311Q to this meeting.
Right.
Last meeting, we would have normally brought the audit report. And the calendar of reporting with the state is all off this year because taxes were delayed, if you recall. So the budget was delayed, our reporting's all delayed. The auditors did receive the rules to audit the CARES grant. And right now, Ryan anticipates he will have the audit ready for the February board meeting. And we'll have the 311Q ready for February also.
So it seems like, what date's the February board meeting? The 17th?
I'd have to check.
I believe so.
Is it the third Wednesday?
Yeah, yes. Let's quickly look.
Yeah,
here.
17th. Does that mean we should schedule a meeting on the 10th?
Yes, please.
Yes, I think we should.
Okay. Is that okay with the members for the 10th? I see Tammy shaking her head, and I'm looking, where on the screen is Belinda? There she is, right in the middle. Who's that? Paul Lynch spot, right? Is right, the guy right in the middle? That's Belinda.
You are
Are you
dating
okay on the
yourself.
10th, Belinda? Okay, you're on mute, but you shook your head. I saw it, so I'll testify to it. Okay, so we're okay for the 10th. You'll send out an invite like you do.
Mm-hmm. Yep, will do.
Okay, proposed future agenda items. Well, we mentioned the 311Q and the audit. Any others from the members? Not seeing, hearing, or seeing any signs. So I think we can, I bet the 311 and the audit, the audit's a pretty full meeting usually.
Yes.
If you can get through the audit in an hour, we did good.
Yes.
Especially if they still have that stirs PERS, it's a liability, but it's really an asset question that I'm not going to get, and I will ask about, and you'll try to explain it to me.
Yes.
Maybe by the third or fourth year, it'll start to sink in. Okay,
Yeah,
then.
John, if only you would be on the board for a few years, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to stick
exactly.
around just to understand this concept. How the negative asset is really not a liability, nor, okay. Anyway, I think we got through to the end. We went about 7 minutes over. But any other business or questions, comments from any members? Thank you for those that joined us. I see Mary Aaron and Matthew,
And Mark.
very consistent. And I know Mark was someplace.
No, he's here.
I can't find him on my screen. There he is.
You
the
can
guy
only ever
moving.
see the top
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. Mark Whitworth the block. That's what I
Yeah,
say.
exactly.
Right. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Trustee Martin. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Trennis, everybody. Thank you.